Lena Thompson thought she'd found the perfect weekend escape. A cozy cabin tucked deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city. Her boyfriend, Daniel Reed, convinced her it would be their little adventure. Just the two of them. No distractions, no neighbors, no problems. But what they didn't know was that the cabin had a history. And once night fell, they would learn that some Airbnb stays are never meant to end. When I first booked the Airbnb, I thought I had stumbled upon a hidden gem. The photos made it look like something out of a magazine. A rustic cabin tucked away in the woods, with soft, golden lights glowing from its windows and a fire pit out front surrounded by wooden chairs. It looked quiet, peaceful, untouched. I told myself this trip was going to be the perfect break from my routine. I had been buried in stress for weeks, unable to sleep properly, my nerves stretched thin from city noise and constant demands. What I needed was silence, a place where the world wouldn't follow me. This cabin seemed like exactly that. The drive was long, the road narrowing the deeper I went into the woods. The forest grew denser, branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. My phone signal grew weaker until it vanished completely, leaving me feeling cut off, yet strangely free. For a while, it felt almost like I was traveling into another world, one carved out by isolation and shadow. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun had already dipped low behind the trees, bleeding orange and purple across the sky. The place stood quietly among the trees, its wooden frame dark against the fading light. There were no other houses in sight, no neighbors, no distant glow of street lamps. Just the cabin and the forest pressing in from all sides. I stepped out of the car and listened. There were no voices, no cars, no hum of electricity, only the sound of the wind moving through the trees and the faint, steady rhythm of my own breathing. For a moment, I felt small. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside and found everything just as the photos promised. The wooden floor creaked under my boots. The walls carried the faint scent of pine and something else. Dampness, maybe. The living room held a worn couch, a small coffee table, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in some time. Upstairs was a single bedroom with a queen-sized bed covered in red flannel sheets, perfectly tucked, almost staged like a hotel. Everything was neat and orderly, but it all felt strangely unused, like no one had ever actually stayed here for long. I wandered through the cabin, touching surfaces, checking the windows, opening closets. Everything was clean but empty, as though someone had prepared the space for guests, but never expected them to truly live in it. That emptiness gave me a strange sense of unease. It was too perfect, too untouched. Still, I told myself it was what I wanted. No clutter, no reminders of anyone else. Just me and silence. As darkness settled outside, the cabin seemed to change. The woods beyond the windows turned black, swallowing all shapes and distance. The glass reflected my own face back at me whenever I glanced outside, and behind my reflection, the void stretched endlessly. I tried to ignore the prickling at the back of my neck as I sat on the couch scrolling my phone, though the weak signal barely loaded anything. After a while, I gave up, turning the screen off and letting the silence press in. There was something unsettling about that silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I had imagined. It was heavier, thicker, like the air itself was waiting. I strained to hear anything at all. An animal outside, the rustle of leaves, even the hum of the refrigerator. But nothing came. The world beyond the cabin walls might as well have ceased to exist. When I finally decided to get ready for bed, I went upstairs and noticed the guest book on the nightstand. At first, I thought it would be filled with cheerful little notes from past visitors, thank yous, jokes, bits of advice for the next guest. But when I opened it, the pages were almost completely blank, page after page of emptiness, as if no one had ever bothered to write. Only the very last page held anything. The words were written in shaky, uneven handwriting, almost like whoever wrote them had been in a rush or terrified of something. It said only one thing: Don't stay after dark. The sight of it made my skin crawl. I stared at those words longer than I should have, as though they might shift or reveal some hidden meaning if I looked hard enough. But they didn't. They just sat there, stark and final. My chest tightened as the silence of the cabin deepened around me. When I finally turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I woke to the sound of something moving. At first it was faint, blending with the rhythm of the wind brushing against the cabin walls, but as my mind cleared from sleep, I realized it was sharper than that. Measured, deliberate, too heavy to be anything natural. My eyes shot open, staring into the pitch-black room. The air felt colder than before, pressing down against my skin, and my heartbeat pounded so loudly in my chest that I feared it would give me away. I told myself it was just the house shifting in the night, the wood adjusting to the drop in temperature. But the sound persisted. Slow, steady creaks that rose up from the floorboards beneath me, not random but patterned, almost like footsteps. The weight of them grew clearer the more I strained to listen. They moved in rhythm, pausing between each groan of wood, deliberate in a way no house settling ever could be. My throat tightened as I reached for the small lamp on the nightstand. The click of the switch felt louder than it should have, but when the light flickered on, it only gave me more unease. The room looked normal. The bed neatly made beneath me, the dresser standing silent, the curtains drawn against the darkness outside. Yet the sound had stopped the instant the light appeared, as though whoever or whatever had been moving had frozen in place. I sat there, unable to breathe properly, waiting for it to return. Minutes stretched into something heavier, and the silence grew unbearable. Finally, I forced myself to get up. Each step across the wooden floor was a struggle, the boards squealing under my weight as if betraying my movements. I made my way downstairs, heart thundering with every step. The living room was cold, colder than it had been before, the air heavy with the damp scent of moss and earth. I scanned the room in the weak glow from the lamp I had carried down, but everything looked untouched. The couch sat where I had left it, my phone still lying on the coffee table. I checked the front door, locked, bolted, secure. Every window was shut. Still, the air carried the heavy impression of presence, as though someone had just left, the echo of their weight still lingering in the air. And then I saw it. In the middle of the wooden floor, dark against the pale boards, was a muddy footprint. It was clear, sharp, and fresh, the damp edges still glistening in the dim light. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I had taken off my shoes the moment I arrived, and even if I hadn't, the tread was nothing like mine. This print was larger, the outline distorted as if pressed by a heavier weight than a normal step. I stared at it for far too long, convincing myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe I had tracked it in without realizing. Maybe the cleaner had left it behind. But the longer I looked, the less those excuses held, because I noticed something else. Another footprint, faint but visible, leading away from the first. And then another. They trailed across the living room, angled toward the staircase. My stomach dropped as I followed them with my eyes, watching how they grew lighter with each step, as though whoever left them had slowly vanished. The last mark disappeared into the shadows at the base of the stairs, leaving no sign of where they had gone. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, to flee into the night regardless of the forest and the cold. But the thought of opening the door, of stepping into the vast blackness outside where anything could be waiting, paralyzed me. I stood there gripping the lamp, its dim glow trembling in my shaking hand, as though its fragile light was the only thing keeping the darkness from closing in. I forced myself to back away, to retreat toward the couch where I could at least see the entire room. The footprint stared back at me, undeniable, mocking my attempts at reason. The silence was worse now, broken only by the pounding of blood in my ears. Finally, exhaustion overtook fear. I curled into the corner of the couch, clutching the lamp close to me until the bulb grew hot against my skin. I kept my eyes on the staircase, watching for any sign of movement, any shift in the shadows. But nothing came. And yet, just before sleep finally claimed me, I swore I heard the faintest creak of a floorboard above me. One last step, waiting in the dark. The morning light did little to ease the fear that had lodged itself deep in my chest. Sunlight crept weakly through the curtains, pale and thin, not strong enough to chase away the unease that clung to every corner of the cabin. I sat up on the couch, my body stiff from the restless night, and stared toward the staircase. Nothing moved, no sound carried from above, but the memory of the footprints made my stomach knot. I couldn't deny what I had seen. Someone had been inside with me, or still was. I forced myself to check the doors and windows again. Every lock was in place, every latch secured. There was no sign of forced entry, no open window, no broken glass. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the prints, that my mind, fogged by exhaustion and fear, had played tricks on me. But when I stepped closer to the floor, I saw the faint stains where the mud had dried and flaked. They were real. I wasn't imagining anything. The silence of the cabin pressed harder on me in the daylight. There were no bird song, no rustling animals in the woods, just the hollow stillness that made the place feel abandoned. The more I walked through it, the stranger the cabin seemed. The kitchen held only the bare minimum, dusty utensils, a chipped mug, an empty shelf. The refrigerator hummed but was completely barren. The bathroom mirror was cracked down the middle, splitting my reflection into jagged fragments that didn't line up with my movements. I couldn't shake the feeling that none of it had been set up for comfort, but rather arranged to look like it was livable. I wandered toward the closet under the stairs, unsure why the sight of the small wooden door unsettled me so much. My hand hovered over the handle longer than it should have. Finally, I opened it. Inside, instead of brooms or cleaning supplies, there was a small box tucked neatly on the floor. It looked old, covered in dust, its corners worn soft with age. I hesitated before pulling it out, the weight of it heavier than I expected. When I lifted the lid, I felt my chest tighten. The box was filled with old photographs. They were black and white, curled at the edges, their surfaces faded and spotted. Each photo showed the cabin, always from the same angle outside, as if the photographer had stood in the same spot every time. In some, the trees were younger, the wood of the cabin fresher. In others, the forest had grown thick, swallowing the background. But it wasn't the cabin itself that made my skin crawl, it was the people. In every photograph, there were figures standing outside the cabin. Families, couples, even a few children, dressed in clothing from different decades. Their expressions were indistinct, blurred by the fading of the pictures, but their postures were stiff, unnatural, like they hadn't posed willingly. My eyes moved from one photo to the next, unease gnawing deeper with every face I saw. Then I noticed it, the window. In every single photograph, the upstairs bedroom window was visible behind the people. And in each one, without exception, there was a figure standing inside the cabin, gazing out. A tall, shadowed shape, featureless, but unmistakably there. My fingers trembled as I shuffled through the stack, photo after photo, and there it was, again and again, always present, always watching. The air in the cabin grew heavier, colder. I shoved the photos back into the box, but the damage was already done. The realization burned in my mind. Whoever had stayed here before me hadn't been alone either. That figure in the window had been watching long before I arrived. I pushed the box back into the closet and shut the door, as though sealing it away might undo what I had seen. My heart wouldn't slow down. I walked quickly toward the living room, but when I glanced at the staircase, my breath caught in my throat. There, on the wall above the stairs, smeared dark against the pale wood, was a handprint. It was large, its fingers splayed wide, and it looked fresh, the mud not yet dried. I had checked those walls last night. It hadn't been there before. I stared at it, frozen in place, the silence of the cabin deepening around me. The handprint seemed to pulse in the dim light, a mark of something that wanted me to know it was here. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just a guest in this cabin. I was being claimed. The storm came with no warning. One moment, the forest outside the cabin was silent, heavy with the stillness I had grown to dread, and the next, rain hammered against the windows with relentless force. Thunder rolled through the trees, shaking the walls, and the power flickered once before dying completely. The sudden loss of light left me stranded in darkness so complete that the flicker of my candle seemed fragile, almost useless against it. I sat near the fireplace, though no fire burned inside. The shadows stretched across the room in long, uneven shapes, twisting as the candle flame danced. My nerves were raw, every sound amplified by the storm. The wind howled through the trees, branches scraping against the cabin's siding like claws. The rain pounded harder, and each strike against the glass made me fear the windows would shatter inward. But it wasn't the storm that unsettled me most. It was the sound above me, the footsteps. They came slowly, pressing into the floorboards overhead, distinct and deliberate. The steady rhythm left no doubt. Someone was up there, moving back and forth across the bedroom where I had slept the night before. My skin prickled with the kind of fear that hollowed out my chest and froze my body in place. I stared up at the ceiling, my candle trembling in my grip as the boards groaned. I wanted to convince myself it was just the storm. Houses made noise in bad weather, I told myself, expanding and shifting. But no house had footsteps like this. The pacing was unmistakable. Forward, pause, backward, pause, again and again. Whoever it was, they weren't wandering aimlessly. They were waiting. The storm outside grew louder, covering the sound for moments at a time, but I knew the steps were still there. Every time the thunder faded, I could hear them again, dragging across the boards, circling. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the candle like it was the only thing tethering me to safety. I tried to force myself to move, to grab my bag and run out into the storm. But the thought of opening the door into that violent, endless forest stopped me cold. The idea of being trapped outside in the dark, soaked and vulnerable, seemed worse than sitting here in this haunted silence. So I stayed, paralyzed, the storm rattling the cabin like a cage. The footsteps grew louder, closer to the staircase. I could almost picture it, something descending slowly, step by step, dragging its weight down toward me. My breath quickened, my chest tight, my throat too dry to swallow. I kept my eyes locked on the staircase, waiting for the first glimpse of movement. But nothing came. The steps stopped just before reaching the bottom, leaving only the sound of rain and thunder to fill the void. I thought it was over. But then the candle flickered violently, the flame bending low as though something unseen had moved through the room. The shadows writhed across the walls, distorting until I thought I saw faces within them, wide, twisted, watching me from the corners. I blinked hard, but the feeling of being surrounded only grew stronger. And then I made the mistake of glancing toward the window. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the glass in a harsh white flash. For a second, I thought my reflection stared back at me. But it wasn't me. Pressed against the glass was a face. Pale, stretched thin, the skin almost translucent. The eyes were wide and unblinking, staring straight into me, their depth hollow and endless. Its mouth hung open just enough to reveal the suggestion of teeth, sharp and wrong, though no breath fogged the window. I dropped the candle, the flame sputtering before catching again, and scrambled backward until my spine hit the cold wall. My chest heaved, my pulse roaring in my ears, but when I looked again, the face was gone. Only the black glass reflected my trembling figure. Rain still streaking down the surface. I told myself it was a trick of the storm, the lightning warping shapes outside. But deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, watching me from the woods. Something had been here long before I arrived, and now it was no longer content to stay hidden. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, the silence between thunderclaps was worse, because in those pauses I could hear the faint creak again, footsteps returning upstairs as though retreating into the room above me, waiting for me to follow. When morning finally came, I felt as though I had been holding my breath through the entire night. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside strangely still, as if the forest itself was recovering from the violence of the night before. The cabin was quiet again, but not in a way that gave relief. It was the heavy kind of silence, pressing in on me, reminding me of everything I had heard and seen. I stood slowly, my body stiff, and gathered my bag with trembling hands. I didn't care about the food I had brought, the clothes I had folded neatly in the dresser, or the cheap bottle of wine still on the counter. None of it mattered anymore. I just wanted to leave this place behind. I wanted to feel the weight of civilization again, the noise of cars, the comfort of streetlights, the simple relief of knowing other people were close by. The doorknob was cold in my grip as I pulled it open, and the damp air of the forest rushed in. The ground outside was soaked from the storm, mud clinging to my shoes as I stepped out onto the porch. For the first time since arriving, I allowed myself to look back at the cabin in the daylight. It looked almost ordinary now, the wood shining faintly with moisture, the roof dripping from the rain. It could have been any rental, any charming rustic getaway. But then my gaze drifted upward. The curtains of the bedroom window stirred slightly, though no breeze touched them. Behind the glass, just for the briefest second, I thought I saw a figure. Tall, unmoving, watching. My stomach twisted violently. It was the same place I had slept my first night here, the same window that appeared in all those photographs. My pulse hammered in my ears as I forced myself to look away and walk faster, each step heavier with dread. The forest road stretched endlessly in front of me. I half ran, half stumbled, my bag digging into my shoulder as branches tore at my arms and face. I told myself not to look back, but the sensation of eyes on me was unbearable. Every time I slowed, I imagined something closing the distance behind me, its silent weight pressing into the earth where my footsteps had just been. When I finally reached my car, relief surged through me so strongly it nearly dropped me to my knees. I threw my bag inside and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking too much to fit them into the ignition at first. When the engine roared to life, it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to feel safe again. That's when I picked up my phone. The screen lit up with signal bars, stronger than I had seen in days. Dozens of notifications poured in at once, vibrating in my hand until I nearly dropped it. They were all from the Airbnb app. One after another, identical messages filled the screen, stacked on top of each other until my eyes blurred trying to read them. Every message contained the same words, repeated endlessly. You never checked out. A chill spread through me as I stared at the screen. My reservation had only been for 2 nights. I was leaving early, abandoning the place, but the app acted as though I had never left at all, as though I was still inside the cabin. My hands grew numb as I scrolled, but the notifications didn't stop. New ones kept appearing, one every few seconds, the same phrase echoing again and again. You never checked out. My stomach churned, and against every instinct, I looked up from the phone toward the cabin. It was barely visible now through the trees, small and distant, yet unmistakable. In the upstairs window, a shadow stood still, darker than the daylight around it. I blinked hard and it didn't move.